So welcome everyone to our friends from around the world. I'm Dave Winsborough. I'm one of the founders of Deeper Signals, and the session that we're about to run is to just provide some tools for people who are leading teams through these pretty challenging times. Here in New Zealand, we're in what we call level 4 lockdown, which means everyone is isolated in their own homes. Business is still operating, although vastly reduced under the circumstances, and we've been pretty busy down here helping organisations adjust to managing and leading in this circumstance, which means everyone's virtual at the moment. So these are some tools that we found have been useful. As all Deeper Signals products, this is evidence-based, and we're happy to share some of the science behind it. It's only a 30-minute session, so we're going to go reasonably quickly. We want to have a look at a little bit of what we know the lockdown from COVID-19 is doing to the work environment, and then we want to have a think about the attributes of leaders through crisis. And we're just going to share 5 simple tools or points to help people manage during these times. I want to emphasize that we come with a bias. We have a strong belief in identifying the uniqueness of people. We aren't interested so much in looking at the average or describing the average worker. We take a position of valuing cognitive diversity, and for that reason we encourage leaders to think about how can they manage the individuals on the inside of teams as well as trying to understand their teams. So that's going to be a theme that runs through the presentation today. Little tiny bit of housekeeping. If you could just mute your microphone, but please do use the chat function. This is a Google Hangout. The chat function is in the top right, and my colleague, Dr. Rhys Akhtar, who's on this session with me, is going to track your comments and questions, and he's going to chime in at various times, and we'll try and answer them. And at the end, if we have any time, then happy to share. Pretty sure this session is going to be available afterwards. And if some of the tools that we mention, if people want to write to Deeper Signals, then we're happy to share those as well. So a little bit about Deeper Signals. I mentioned that we are interested in understanding the uniqueness of people. The whole point of that is to provide feedback to help people grow. We believe that feedback is a force for good. And our platforms and our tools and our interactive reports are all aimed at helping people understand themselves and understand others in order to produce a better workplace and ultimately a better word. We're a mix of data science, psychology, and IO psychology. So the our work blends cutting-edge technology, some AI and machine learning with the science of personality to democratize self-awareness and understanding. And we're very, very good, I think. Wouldn't you say, Rhys?
Yes.
So a little bit, this is some research that we found that has shown how things are changing in the world of work since COVID-19 drove so many people into lockdown. And this is a pretty accurate description of my life at the moment. I imagine it's very similar for most of us, where we've seen the length of our work days blur and become a little longer. We've seen the number of meetings that we have, and all of those meetings are predominantly now video conference, go up by around about a quarter. And you'll see that focus time has gone down by a third the work of Steve Rogelberg, who's written a book called The Surprising Science of Meetings, shows that people experience meetings by and large as interruptions, and yet the natural human tendency to reach out and connect and talk and engage means that we're doing more of it. And as a consequence, you can see that people are interrupted more, but actual work activity has gone down. And one of the most interesting things is that the responsiveness of managers has gone up. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think that at times of crisis, we look to leaders to provide some direction. As long as that is constructive, then hopefully that's a good thing. One of the things that is a consequence we've certainly had feedback on is people feel tired, and people are reporting more anxiety, stress, loneliness, and to a degree, people vary in their responses to being cooped up with partners and families and dogs and cats. So we have to be aware of stress and negative emotion, especially in our work teams. So potentially, a hit to well-being, potentially a hit to effectiveness, which is why leadership becomes really, really important at this time. And thinking about the way in which you lead. One of the weird things I think that happens at times like this, and you can see dictators around the world lean into a crisis or even create a crisis. So because it triggers a response in human beings that we tend to follow confident, loud leaders who tell us what to do. The research, though, shows that effective leaders don't behave like that. So one of our colleagues and co-founder, Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, has shown that people confuse confidence with competence. And what we're much more interested in is competence. And really effective leaders tend to display a lot more humility than confidence. That said, we want leaders who are decisive at these times, who make good decisions, but who also act with integrity, and I think really importantly, show benevolence. So benevolence is a delightful, old-fashioned word that just means kindness. Here in New Zealand, we're particularly lucky, I think, at the moment. Our Prime Minister, the leader of our company, our country, is someone of enormous compassion, and she has made consistently hard but good decisions that are transparent. She's shared lots of information. She's been very clear in explaining the logic behind it, and empathic in understanding the impact that that's going to have on not just the population, but on individuals as well. So I think that we need to focus on the right traits instead of falling for people who are confident or narcissistic or charismatic. And I just want to emphasize again the idea of competence, being decisive, but behaving in a kind way and being humble with it. Which brings us to some of the research that Thomas has done. His last book was questioning whether or not women actually turn out to be better leaders. And I think that there is some evidence for that. We've got a link in this presentation if anyone's interested in reading about some of Thomas's writing in terms of female leaders. Women generally display higher scores on taking initiative, behaving in a resilient way, practicing self-development, and displaying higher levels of integrity and honesty compared to men. So a super interesting question about at these times is that maybe women make better decisions and are better leaders for situations like this, which doesn't stop men behaving in ways that that are the same. So we just want to turn to some tools or techniques or tips in managing teams during these times. The first is to get a picture in your head of what constitutes teamwork. So in my last book, Fusion, The Psychology of Teams, I described, it's pretty simple, really. I mean, when you think about a team exists in order to get something done. Otherwise, it's just a group of people. So if you imagine a bunch of people in the pre-lockdown world waiting in a Starbucks, hanging around in the queue for coffee, not a team, it is a group of people. Teams emerge when there is a task to be done that can't be done by one person alone, or that requires interaction. So the hard aspects of a team refer to the task. So thinking about goals, resources, the way the team gets itself done, the sort of processes and tools that it uses on the inside to get that stuff done. And the other half of the equation is thinking about the people on the team. So teams are always made up of people. People are always individuals, love them or not. And they will form relationships that can be constructive or not. So leaders need to pay attention to the soft aspects of the team. Have we produced cohesion? Are the relationships in the team constructive? Is there a climate that promotes psychological safety? Do people trust each other? So teams need clear goals, plans and processes, but that's not the end of a leader's task. And leaders need to pay attention to the relationships on the inside of the team and the individuals on the inside of the team. So the softer elements are about managing individuals and managing relationships and interactions. A related point then is for leaders to tune in to the signals from the team. So if we follow that through, we can think about indicators of whether the team is performing well or not in terms of the kind of hard and the soft, the task indicators and the people indicators. So task indicators might be that people are slow to deliver to deadlines, are distracted, standards might slip, or people might begin to drop the ball. So information is not flowing between people, handoffs aren't done smoothly, people have forgotten or dropped off calls, left off email chains. Those are the hard kind of indicators. The softer indicators are going to be things like people being slow to return calls or emails. Just remember my point before about being locked down. You're managing the situation in your apartments or in your homes, which involve other people and still trying to fit work in and around, which is going to reduce tolerance. It's a greater cognitive load. We would expect people might get anxious about job security or health, money, relationships. And that cognitive load, all those other demands and worries, quite likely to lead to less tolerance with colleagues, a frustration with being interrupted, and just a general lack of goodwill. So the first tool for leaders to understand that they've got to balance those two elements of a team, and the way to do that is to tune into the signals that we're getting from the team and be alert to those. I think the other thing that's really useful is to pick up this idea that we're very strong on of personalizing your leadership. So if anyone knows the work of Graham and LMX, Leader Member Exchange, building relationships with the individuals on the team is fundamental to really good management. The evidence is clear. If people feel that the leader has their interests at heart and understands them, we get greater organizational citizenship behavior, we get greater cohesion in the team, and we get greater commitment not only to the organization, but to the work of the team. So we take the position that leadership is a resource for the good of the group. And I just want to emphasize that leadership is a resource to help the group be successful. It's not about your role. It's not about your needs. It's about their needs. And in order to do that, you've got to play to people's individual drivers. Now, we're a company that promote our product, which is all about understanding people. So we have a particularly good psychological assessment. But whether or not you choose to use a tool like that, we would encourage you to think about each person as an individual and think about their needs. Now, the utility of that is knowing that some people are going to behave differently in different circumstances. So if you think, for example, about those people who tend to be more anxious and upset, probably going to want greater hand-holding. Other people who maybe prefer security, like predictability, are going to feel more disrupted because routines are thrown out, are unable to follow their normal patterns of work, and are going to seek some reassurance from the leader. Other people, maybe who are more introverted, are going to find some benefit from working alone and may pull back. So as a leader, you need to be sensitive to the changes in people's behavior and think about tuning your leadership to their particular needs and wants. And since we're all going virtual now, it's important to understand how to draw people out during virtual meetings and make sure that you're listening to them and not just talking, as the leader. The other thing that's super important in leading teams is context, creating a shared understanding of what it is that's going on and constantly refreshing that context. So leaders engaging their people and having people summarize what they understand the situation is helps the team develop a sense of groupness. So that shared perspective helps people operate from the same assumptions. When we're separate and in our bubbles, it can be quite easy to go off on a tangent. And so reinforcing this context, the shared context, this understanding of what's going on outside of the team and inside of the team actually improves the collective intelligence. So Woolley's, the researcher Woolley, her concept of collective intelligence is a really useful one to get your head around. Knowledge sharing, promoting knowledge sharing, and redefining the team's mission. The simple tool that you can use is just to pose the questions at the bottom of the slide. What's going on? So what does that mean? And now what do we do? So this is a tool that we use that is a deeper signals tool around giving feedback. What's the situation? So what does that mean? Now what are we going to do about it? Equally useful in promoting shared awareness and perspective across the team. If anyone's familiar with the Stephen Covey circles of influence, circles of concern, as a leader, that tool can be particularly useful at this time. People worry about things that they can't actually do anything about. So we might be concerned about rising case numbers or the lack of medical equipment, but it's very unlikely that we can control those things. And the evidence from a variety of sources shows that focusing on things that are in your control actually promotes a greater sense of, it reduces anxiety and promotes a greater sense of individual and team efficacy. So while a leader might empathize with people's feelings about what's going on, gently guide the team to focus back on what can be under its control. And Covey has this notion of the circle of concern, all those things that worry us, the circle of influence, which I'll talk about in a second, and the circle of control. We want to bring it down, focus on those things that we can control. Part of the leader's role is to go, if there are things that we can or should influence, then that's one of the things that a leader can take on behalf of the team. So maybe we don't have the resources, we don't have the laptops we need, or we don't have software that would make our lives easier. Part of the job of the leader then is to influence up the chain and see if we can get the tools and resources that are required. So helping the team and the individuals develop a sense of agency, focus on what can be controlled. Fourth tool, obviously team well-being is important, and the most valuable thing that a leader can do at this time is regularly check in with the people on the team. And by that I mean an individual check-in, where you might run through a tool. We have a tool we call the 5 5s. It just asks, how are things going at home? Are you clear about what you have to do? So is the role and task clarity clear? Asking people about whether they feel supported, whether they believe that the team is going to be successful. So just having a structured check-in can make an enormous difference, and offers up the chance of conversations to assess where people are at, both in terms of work and home life. And it goes without saying, if just that slide that we had before, one of the things that people look for from leaders at these times is that you have my interests at heart, and that you act towards me with benevolence, some kindness. One other thing I think that's just a tip that we've picked up on: don't overload people with communication. So you saw that the number of interruptions on that slide earlier has gone up. Be careful about not overloading people or not confusing people with many channels. So texting, emailing, video conferencing, sending messages on Slack or through Microsoft Teams. Just be careful that there aren't too many channels that people have to wade through in order to get the key message. You might want to think about reserving some channels for important messages. And our last tool is all about you. Two things. The last thing you want to see when you look up towards your leader is someone who has kind of lost the plot, or is panicking, or is anxious. Even if you are, there is a theatre of leadership that it's important to pay attention to, and you are playing a role for the team. So to some extent, every time you speak to people, you are on stage, and it's important that you manage your own behaviour. And again, we would encourage people to develop self-awareness and self-insight. So strengths can become overused. It's great that you're good with detail, but now that you're anxious or worried, or you want to increase your sense of control, checking up on the team all the time is actually going to reduce productivity and frankly just annoy people. So understanding your own profile, understanding your own extremes of behavior is the first step to managing it, and managing yourself is an important step in being a good leader for the team. Reese, how are we going on time?
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay, so I think we'll pause in a second. Um, just summarize. So, firstly, think about the two aspects of managing a team. There's the task aspects and the people aspects. The first tool that we encourage you is just tune in to the signals coming from the team, both at a team level and an individual level. The second tool was just to emphasize the value of building context and shared awareness across the team of what's going on, and taking the time to recalibrate the mission of the team and make sure that people are all in tune with that. Our third tool was this notion of focusing much more on what can be controlled and helping people detune from the things that worry them but they can't do anything about. The last point is checking in. Sorry, the fourth point is checking in and making sure that you take the time to that people feel that you care about them and you're alert to their psychological well-being. And then the last point is just understanding that you and everyone else is individual in the way that you respond at these times. And insight is your best weapon to managing yourself, managing others, and being a good leader. And if we have any questions, let's see if we can answer them.
Yeah, that was great, Dave. Thanks for sharing that. So we've got a few questions coming through. The first one from Pamela is, how do I lead a group of people working from home while they are in fear of their future as long as COVID-19 is concerned?
So I think that there's two parts to that. So Pamela, there is the physical concern that people have about the virus, and if you're talking about physical health, then we've got really good. I think there's a couple of things to say. What you can do is practice good hand hygiene. Wear a mask if you go outside. Practice social distancing. So those three things, more than anything else, will stand you in good stead. It's the most that we can do. When it comes to job security, I think it's really important that leaders don't provide false hope and do provide some hope. So if we're talking about job security, so for example, here in New Zealand, a number of firms have reduced staff wages, have given people, for example, in my firm, we've talked about decision points, and we've shared the data that will form the basis for those decision points about what we do, and we've shared plans with people. So a worst case scenario would be that money dries up. That's going to dry up for 3 or 4 months. And at that point, we're going to have to make some decisions about staffing numbers. And I think that that transparency goes to the heart of integrity. And you can't give your people any more than being transparent and honest and sharing with them so that they can make decisions for themselves. And the only other thing that you can do as a leader, I think, is empathize and understand that there are some tough things. The world is going through convulsive change. So,
perfect. And then we've got another question from Amar, who says, are there strong cognitive signals to assess anxiety, insecurity, stress, etc. in employees working from home so that the manager can proactively reach out to help individual cases? So I think, just to paraphrase, are there behavioral or cognitive signals that someone can stay alert to, given that they're working remotely, so they can reach out and support?
Yep. There are. So I think the first thing is if we see a change from a person's normal pattern of behaviour, so the person maybe is communicating less or maybe communicating a whole lot more. The second and most obvious one is to listen at two levels. Listen to what is said and listen to how it is said. And that could be on email or it could be on a call. So someone may start using more words that convey fear or anxiety, and it might not be talking about themselves. They just might be, there might be more references to the pandemic or responses or changing infection rates or death rates. But it might also come through in tone of voice. So I think that being aware of changes, think about what is being said, how it is being said, and alert to some of the signs that we said before in this deck. Someone missing deadlines, someone not showing up for meetings online, someone who is less available to colleagues, who has a greater number of mistakes, are all indicators that that person is carrying a greater cognitive load and is more likely than not anxious and upset. And as a leader, don't hesitate. Reach out, ask, hey, how's it going? I've noticed these things. Is everything okay?
Right. And a last question. So there are a few questions that we haven't had time to get to, and we'll follow up with you separately. But the last question is from David, and he said, have you seen any evidence of people deciding that they like virtual work much more than being in the office?
Yeah, I think we have. I think I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but I would be very surprised if we don't see more examples of virtual work. I think lots of companies have suddenly discovered that they can do it, and that people actually don't goof off and work hard. So again, some individuals, it suits them down to the ground. And yes, I think more firms are going to be tolerant.
And just one more, Dave, from Stefan. How can we equip ourselves to appropriately address individual differences in response to the current situation?
Okay, so it's the big question, Stefan. I think so. I'm going to blatantly advertise our tool. I think it's really useful to understand other people through the lens of personality and individual differences. And so taking the time, it's not hugely expensive to put someone through a psych test and share the results with each other. Hey, this is how I show up. This is how you show up. What does that mean for how we operate together? So it's useful to have a shared language in that regard. And so, yeah, I don't think we could do better than playing around with some of those tools.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.